Good morning.
Good morning.
I just said to Judge Stark, I cannot believe you are actually getting CLE credit to listen to me. I think I have achieved a lifelong dream from when I first sat before I was admitted to the Delaware Bar, that I would be giving rather than receiving CLE. So I hope I can offer just a little bit of engagement, information, and perhaps relief from the first hour of today's CLE. But seriously, I'm grateful to Judge Stark for the invitation, to Andrew Mayo for that introduction, and for the folks in my office who do the work that I'm going to talk about for a few minutes on the Senate Judiciary Committee. It really has for 8 years now been my honor to represent the bench and bar of Delaware, the citizens of Delaware and Washington. It has never been boring in 8 years, but I will tell you this year has been exceptionally interesting. It is always fun to be home. I am home all week in Delaware and getting to watch some of my teenage boys who are seniors in high school play in different sporting events and go up and down the state and meet with people of all different backgrounds and ages and hear their concerns or advocate for their interests. But as someone who's been a member of the bar since 1993, one of the things that moves me most and excites me most in Washington, yes, I just said that. One of the things that moves me most and excites me most in Washington is engaging on behalf of you, because you've got a unique role. For Delaware, our bar is a critical part of our economy, of our community, of our national prominence. We attract people here from all over the country and the world because of our unique courts, because of the quality of the bench, because of the quality of the bar. And you play a special role that in the general public I think is not as broadly understood as it should be in contributing to the vibrancy and the diversity and the caliber of life here, not just in Wilmington and Newcastle County, but up and down our state. First, let me talk about judgeships. One of the things I want to leave with you in talking about federal judgeships is that in pursuit of the opportunity to nominate two qualified candidates, very promising candidates, for vacancies in the federal district court bench, the process has been impressively collaborative and bipartisan. So when President Obama, and now I'm not talking about the District Court of Delaware in the next few sentences, as I think many of you know, when President Obama left office, there were more than 100 vacancies on our federal courts at all levels. One that had been held open in ways that violated tradition and comity, and many others that had been held open because the Democratic control, the Democratic lead in the Senate Judiciary Committee had respected a long tradition, century-old tradition on our committee called the blue slip, where you don't advance nominees who aren't supported by their home state senators. And so far, the Senate has confirmed 33 judges. 33 out of 100 does not sound particularly significant, but I'll just remind you how they lay out. This constellation includes 17 district court judges, 15 circuit court judges, and a Supreme Court justice. And a fair amount of time and effort and energy was dedicated to the consideration, review, and confirmation of now Justice Gorsuch. And there have been more circuit court judges confirmed at this point in this presidency than any previous presidency. And we've got notice that there will be another, I believe, 7 up for cloture votes just this coming week. In the midst of all that, and a fair amount of back and forth and a fair amount of partisanship around whether or not blue slips would be respected or not, Senator Carper and I were blessed to be informed well in advance that Judge Robinson and Judge Slate, after a decade and 2 decades of service to our community, would be retiring, so we had plenty of advance notice. We formed, I think, a strong nominating committee that included a representative group of Delaware's legal community who worked to identify and evaluate promising candidates, and at the end of their process, they advanced finalists that Senator Carper and I both interviewed and then jointly recommended 3 candidates to the Trump administration. As some of you know, White House counsel Don McGahn, the fact that he's a Widener graduate, that he's from the Philadelphia area and knows and understands the value of the Delaware bench was particularly helpful in this process. Because we ended up getting out of the Trump administration 2 terrific nominated candidates. Both Colin Conley and Mary Ellen Noriega had their Judiciary Committee confirmation hearings on Valentine's Day, where I was honored to serve as the ranking member and they were both reported overwhelmingly favorably out of the Judiciary Committee. Unfortunately, there are 25 judges ahead of them, and we are grinding through a district court judge a week. So I have recently conferred with leadership, both Republican and Democrat, about trying to assemble a package. There are a number of judges waiting, not just district court but circuit court, to get through the floor. And at this pace, we are at real risk of not having them confirmed by the whole Senate until July or perhaps even September. And given other developments in the legal field, I'm concerned about that window closing. So I will be continuing to press, in particular Senator Schumer, to do a package by unanimous consent that would allow the filling of these two vital vacancies earlier than the Senate would otherwise be expected to do. I know this process is a little opaque to all of you, but what I wanted to emphasize at the outset was this has been measured, it's been bipartisan, it's been collaborative, and I think ultimately we will have two excellent judges sitting in the Delaware District Court. Despite repeated efforts on the Appropriations Committee, I have so far not secured a fifth judgeship for the Delaware District Court, but it is not just a hope, but an expectation on my part that with enough time on the Appropriations Subcommittee that funds the entire federal judiciary, that opportunity will at some point become a reality. Given how very busy this court is, given the caliber of the court, I think it is not beyond expectation to think that we might well accomplish that in the next few years. Let me talk next about bankruptcy. Delaware has one of the most sophisticated, one of the busiest federal bankruptcy courts in the country. And last year we faced a real challenge because of our 6 judgeships, only one is permanent, and we faced the expiration of 5 of them at the same time. So I worked again in a bipartisan way with a large group of senators to drive the Bankruptcy Judgeship Act, which would ensure that our temporary judgeships would get extended and that our bankruptcy court would have the judges that it needs. Ultimately, after a lot of hard work and a lot of support and engagement from folks in this room, that was signed into law last October. And while I had hoped for a permanent solution, the best I could get out of Chairman Grassley was a 5-year extension for Delaware's expiring judgeships and 2 more judgeships. So to have a bankruptcy court of 7 judgeships, I thought, was an important step forward. Unfortunately, that's not the only development in bankruptcy. As some of you know, I'm generally in favor of bipartisanship. This is the sort of bipartisanship which I would call an unholy alliance. Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, long a fan of Delaware bankruptcy, yes, that was a lot of fun. And Senator John Cornyn of Texas, long a fan of Delaware jurisdiction, somehow found themselves, despite the absolute lack of any other overlapping interest or priority, and introduced an unprecedented bankruptcy venue stripping bill that would eliminate state of incorporation as the basis for venue. This would not only be, I think, very damaging for our state, but for the bankruptcy system as a whole. Studies show that highly experienced, sophisticated courts like Delaware's bankruptcy court produce restructurings that preserve the underlying businesses, that save jobs, and that maximize creditor payments. And I know I'm preaching in part to the choir here, but I really appreciate efforts that have been made by the Delaware and New York bankruptcy bars to help ensure that a broader range of my colleagues understand the misguided arguments being made by my dearly respected friends from the Senator from Massachusetts and the Senator from Texas. When I used to get to hear Senator Biden talk about my friend Orrin Hatch and my friend, I thought, yeah, right. Actually, these are folks I work well with, just not on this issue. Fortunately, Senator Schumer is particularly receptive to the argument that stripping bankruptcy venue from Delaware would be harmful. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been and will be hopeful, but this is a sustained campaign. This was not just a file it and walk away, a piece of brochureware by 2 senators, one facing re-election. I have met in person and repeatedly with Senator Schumer about it, with Chairman Grassley, who's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and with Senator Cornyn to express my displeasure and to see what alternatives there might be. Please know, for those of you for whom this might affect, that for some of you this is an existential threat to your practice. I take this very seriously, and I appreciate that we could lose bankruptcy venue with a 1-sentence bill that would be easy to jam into any of the 1,000-page bills that move several times a year. and I am expecting that Senator Schumer will be, and his staff will not allow that to happen. And in the meantime, I've got a heck of an educational task underway. Most senators, when you approach them on the floor and say, would you like to talk about patents or bankruptcy venue? Find something else far more important to go do at that exact moment. In fact, as I was trying to engage a particular senator who is a lawyer, a graduate of a prominent law school, I was trying to engage him in the importance of patent litigation and its importance to our economy. And after a good 3 minutes, he turned his head slightly to the side and leaned in and he narrowed his eyes and he said, have you always been this way? I said, why, whatever do you mean? He said, you know. I said, you mean a geek who's enthusiastic about intellectual property? He goes, yeah. Well, I think it's a lifelong affliction and one I'm happy to bear. Let me talk for a minute, if I could, about intellectual property issues, because we are now the busiest patent district court in the land. Things have changed, in my view, have improved. Supreme Court, and we have seen a big increase in patent filing, making our patent docket 20% higher, 20% of all new filed cases in the United States. More importantly than just our increase in volume and the complexity of the cases and the demand that places on our district court, there are also a whole series of changes that have been made, both judicial, legislative, and executive branches that cumulatively have had, I think, a very harmful effect in weakening and disrupting the patent system. In particular, valuing patent litigation as a way to resolve this concept of property right that I think is at the very foundation of our country's innovation and competitiveness. So one of these impacts that I just referenced, T.C. Heartland, has affected the volume of cases that we get, but I also want to commend Chief Judge Stark and his colleagues for taking swift action to enlist a roster of visiting judges who helped with the increase, and recognizing that there's been other disruptive changes in terms of court practice and Supreme Court jurisprudence. Some of you may follow this closely. The United States Chamber of Commerce ranks every year the patent systems of countries around the world. We have fallen from 1st to 10th and more recently to 12th. And I think the core reasons for this have to do with the implementation of the USIA, which was a bill signed into law my first year in the Senate, that has allowed for a whole series of post-grant proceedings before the PTO and ways that the Patent and Trademark Office, the PTO, have implemented the PTAB, the Patent and Trial Appeal Board, have led to a remarkable rate of invalidation of already issued patents. So I could go on about this at enormous length. Trust me, my colleagues walk away from me when I do. But I've been able to find in Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas a good partner for legislation on this. In the last Congress, it was David Vitter of Louisiana. Again, senators with whom I share relatively little other than a passion for protecting this unique constitutional creation. Senators Durbin and Hirono have also joined me. We've introduced legislation called the Stronger Patents Act, and it's really designed to take some critical first steps in addressing inter partes review and PTAB practice and review standards to make them the same as the district court and some of the institution principles. Let me just briefly say that along with that piece of legislation, I've also worked with Senator Hatch of Utah on a number of pieces of legislation relevant in intellectual property, most currently something called the Big Data for IP Act, which would encourage the PTO to complete its ongoing IT upgrades and explore new tools like machine learning to improve patent examination, but most importantly, extending their fee-setting authority. PTO fee diversion was something I was hugely passionate about when I worked at W.L. Gordon Associates. Yes, right now you're thinking, my poor wife, she has to listen to this when I come home. And I've been actively involved in the confirmation and in a recent oversight hearing of the new Patent and Trademark Office Director, Andrei Iancu. I am very optimistic about the direction he may well take the Patent and Trademark Office and sort of striking a more middle-of-the-road balance in terms of some of the things he can do in his direction of the Patent and Trademark Office that I think will restore some sense and some balance to how patent litigation is unfolding. I know folks in the room may well disagree with my views, but I think strong patents are better for our country, and I think seeing them litigated here in Delaware is better for our community. Let me last talk to some critical things in federal law enforcement. I am not just on the Judiciary Committee, but also on the Appropriations Subcommittee that funds the federal judiciary and all federal law enforcement. And as a resident of Wilmington, one of the things that's been a real concern of mine in recent years is making sure that we are as tightly integrated and supportive as we possibly can, from the federal law enforcement side to the challenges that some of our local jurisdictions are facing in terms of violent crime. I'm pleased that our U.S. Marshal Mike McGowan is here with us this morning. I've had the chance this week to also sit down and have very encouraging meetings with the Secret Service, which has an office here, and the U.S. Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Office, USATF. The senior agent in charge came up from Baltimore and reviewed the cumulative difference it has made for Wilmington in terms of homicide investigations and prosecutions. The ATF office here has grown over the last 6 years from 5 agents to 25. And the impact that they have had on the ability of our local law enforcement to investigate and successfully prosecute gun crimes is nothing short of spectacular. So I try to continue to support, to help fund, and to help push forward investments by federal law enforcement agencies. My concern is that they may see a significant improvement in violent crime numbers and be reassigned elsewhere or pull back. I think having the U.S. Attorney, federal law enforcement, our Attorney General, local law enforcement, and of course the bench and bar engaged in ensuring that the rule of law is observed here in Delaware and improving public safety is one of the things I am most passionate about. The front page of our newspaper this morning showed a remarkable outcome for our U.S. Attorney and for everybody in the U.S. Attorney's Office and in federal law enforcement who prosecuted really one of the only financial crimes I've seen successfully prosecuted in the country after what was a nationwide financial system meltdown. And I just wanted to congratulate U.S. Attorney David Weiss. I neglected to mention him previously, in part because his renomination was so smooth. But you know, when there's a change in administration, the U.S. Attorney, the U.S. Marshal, as well as 2 district court vacancies could have been points of real contention, but were not. And I think having U.S. Attorney David Weiss in place is a tremendous thing, and we've seen some real progress in terms of the rule of law. Let me last talk about this guy named Robert Mueller. You may have heard of him. I'm living in an interesting world. The current FBI director, Chris Wray, was a classmate in law school, and a guy named Emmett Flood, who I worked with on the Law Journal, just drew a little more attention, and may get to have some more time with Mr. Mueller in upcoming weeks. We'll see. One of the things I've worked very hard on with Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Thom Tillis and Senator Cory Booker is a bill to protect the special counsel. Folks may have differing views on whether or not President Trump will take a truly, I think, unprecedented step and directly try and fire Robert Mueller, but as long as he is calling into Fox and Friends and talking about it or tweeting about it, I think we should take it seriously. Speaker Ryan, Leader McConnell have both said publicly over and over that Special Counsel Mueller is a respected federal law enforcement leader and should be allowed to continue his investigation to its conclusion, whether it concludes that there was nothing, no obstruction, no collusion, or it concludes that there was, and then recommends action by the Congress. What I have said to the President, to Don McGahn, and to Republican colleagues, principally Lindsey and Tom, is that I would stand up and respect and recognize any outcome from Robert Mueller's investigation as long as it's not interfered with. And in a country so deeply and sharply divided in our views about what's going on, about the president and the rule of law, I think it is absolutely essential that we have a respected investigation conclude rather than be somehow waylaid. So long story short, we've worked for several months to craft a bipartisan bill that would make it a little bit harder for the special counsel to be fired without cause and gives him a judicial remedy, something that is currently in regulation in the Department of Justice, and we would make statutory. When we first drafted and introduced this bill, we were told we would never get a hearing. Last fall, we got a hearing, and we had 4 constitutional law specialists testify about it. 2 of them movingly and compellingly in favor, to my undying shame, my own con law professor against. I really should have paid more attention to him in class. We were told after that hearing that we would never get a markup, and last week we got a markup. We were told that the markup would never be successful, And the long story short, the bill came out of the committee by 14-7. I'm just trying to conclude on a positive note by saying, Chairman Grassley offered an amendment at the beginning of the week, and many of the folks in my party or in my leadership assumed that this was some evil plot to kill the plan. It wasn't. Chuck Grassley is a champion of whistleblowers and transparency, and someone who is an institutionalist and believes in the Judiciary Committee. I do not agree with everything he's done. I thought holding open the vacancy for which Merrick Garland was nominated for nearly a year was an unprecedented political interference with the process that should have advanced a very capable nominee. But Chairman Grassley has conducted himself in a very difficult time in a very measured and positive way, and I've expressed to him privately as well as publicly my gratitude for his willingness to take this up, to debate it, to consider it, to weigh it closely, and to ultimately vote for it, as he did. And in the weeks ahead, I'll be advocating on the floor for this to be taken up on the floor. I'm confident this bill would get 60 votes. If it were advanced for a vote this Monday, I'm confident it would get 60 votes. And at the end of the day, all of this is about the rule of law. We may get up in the morning and be passionate about our legal system. We may understand better than most how it is the foundation of our society and how it absolutely plays a central role in making America America. But as we careen and teeter towards a confrontation, possibly, between the president and his legal team and a duly appointed special counsel, I think it is more important than ever that we have rules, that we respect them, and that we have a process that we can all embrace no matter where it leads. Let me close by saying how grateful I am to Erica Songer, to Andy Crawford, and to Christy Gleason, all of whom I believe are somewhere in the back of this room, and how I know attended dutifully this federal bench and bar conference. Yes, Judge Stark is giving me yes. Dutifully attended. None of them fell asleep. Unlike me when I used to attend, forgive me. They are the folks who make this happen. So to the extent you've got questions and concerns, I will take a few questions now if time still permits. I'll take a few questions now happily, but Erica and Andy and Christy, who are all attorneys and exceptional and dedicated to these topics, are the ones who help make it possible for me to be an effective advocate for Delaware to the extent you believe I am. Fortunately, I'm never bored. Fortunately, I'm not on any other committees, so all I have to do is just pay attention to these issues on the Judiciary Committee. That's not true. I'm the ranking member of ethics, and we've been busy. I'm very active on foreign relations matters, small business matters, and for better or worse, appropriations matters, which give me significant opportunities to increase investment in the federal judiciary, federal law enforcement, and dozens of other areas that impact everything from schools and roads to air quality to our national defense. So let me simply close by expressing my gratitude to you for the opportunity to represent this state. It is an exceptional community. I am very proud to be a Delawarean and to have the chance to represent you. And to the extent I am failing or flawed in doing so, I would welcome both your forgiveness and your direct input to hold me accountable in making sure I'm doing as good a job as I possibly can in a partisan and demanding environment. Thank you very much. I look forward to a couple of questions from you.
Good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
Thank you for your remarks. I am not from Delaware. I'm the Chief Judge of the District of New Jersey. And I do have a question because in New Jersey we don't even have any nominations yet for our many vacancies. And I was wondering what your reasonable assessment is in terms of, you said that you're doubtful or concerned that you may not get a hearing for the ones that have been nominated until, past July or whatever. In a situation where we're in New Jersey where we don't even have any nominations in the pipeline at this point for the district court, what is your reasonable assessment of timing? I mean, how long am I looking at, you think, before any help arrives?
I will attempt just a straight answer. You're going to be well into mid to late next year before there's any, I think, prospect. Let me take up the Republican cause for a moment, if I could, on this point. James Lankford and I are good friends. We were on the phone yesterday trying to hammer out something on DACA, on the Dreamer issue. And one of the real blessings James brings me is he lets me know the unvarnished, critical view. So every now and then when I say to him, "So what are you up to these days?" He lets me know. A number of Republican senators, including Senator Lankford, believe that the Democrats are slow-walking every single judge and unreasonably demanding 30 hours of floor time on every single judge, and should not be able to do so. I will not waste your time with the he said, she said about you did Merrick Garland, you did your aunt, you held this, you blew slips, blah, blah, blah. I mean, literally sitting next to some of the members like Leahy and Grassley, they go back to nominations that predate my graduation from high school in pointing at each other and who's mad. Everybody's really mad at everybody in the Senate of the United States right now about judicial confirmations. Senator Lankford is engaged in a campaign to change the rules of the Senate. Again, as have both parties in recent years, to take the 30 hours down to 2. That would allow them to clear the whole backlog and to confirm pretty much all the judges who are currently in the queue before the end of this legislative session. Who knows whether that's what's going to happen. So, best case scenario, we come to an agreement and move a package. We clear the entire backlog. And we get to the end, and they don't change the rules. And we get to the end of this year with a sort of a working understanding about district court vacancies. Fewer of the district court nominees have been highly controversial. It is mostly the circuit court nominees that have taken a great deal of time. If you don't even have nominees, I'm happy to convey this to our friends who are senators, but you got to get busy getting a process and getting nominees in front of the White House and get the White House to move them forward and be clear-eyed about what the range of options really are and how big a gap there might be between Don McGahn. I found White House counsel Don McGahn completely reasonable in this process. Our judicial nominees have received a hearing, so they are on the floor ready for action. They could be confirmed literally Monday if we could come to an agreement. To be in a position where you don't even have names to the White House or names out of the White House means you're probably facing a year from now for those vacancies at the least. Aren't we glad we're in Denver? I'm kidding. This is a problem for our entire country. We face an increasingly politicized backlog that I do not think is constructive. I also, by the way, just as a footnote, I'm really concerned about how commonly I hear journalists and political commentators, and increasingly some senators, referring to a judge as so-and-so is a Bush judge, so-and-so is a Clinton judge, so-and-so is an Obama judge, so-and-so is a Trump judge, as if that tells you how they will rule. And we are increasingly popularizing the idea that judges are just blue and red pegs on a board, and as a result of elections, we just sort of move a little right, a little left. In my experience, that is not the case. Judges are judges, and we need to speak of them with the deference and respect they deserve for being people who have been confirmed through a process which, although at times influenced by the outcomes of elections, of course, is still producing excellent nominees across the board. Do we have one last question? Anybody? Fabulous. I must have stunned you into silence with my again, thank you so much for the opportunity to work with you and for you, and I hope you won't hesitate to raise issues with me of any kind when you have the opportunity. Thank you very much.